Welcome to Byte-Size Impressions. Um, the subject that we're starting here with today, this conversation is less about video games and more about another love of mine, which is film. And this is totally on brand for the channel. Um, Bite-Size Impressions also has Bite-Size Cinema, and I also had done a lot of writing for DVDtalk.com for well over a decade. Um, so the subject that I'm talking about today is one that my friends are endlessly tired of hearing me bang on about. But now that I'm here creating content for both Twitch and YouTube, I figured that this was the perfect time and place to throw some opinions down. Now, to put it bluntly, I am really seriously concerned about the future of filmmaking. Now, Martin Scorsese, as most people know, had gone on record not too long ago to say that Marvel movies aren't cinema, which at face value I did not agree with. And then he followed that up with a clarifying response. In that response, he likens Marvel flicks to that of theme park rides, and he says that there's nothing wrong with that. But rather, the issue is that superhero films, as well as high budget special effects movies in general, have become the primary driving force to get people into theaters. It's the only kind of film that gets a massive marketing push these days, and that right there is what his problem is. He doesn't like that studios are hedging all of their bets on pricey spectacles and established franchises, because his opinion is that if you want the film going experience to survive, let alone thrive, people need exposure to cinematic offerings of all shapes and sizes. And honestly, I agree with that. Now, before anyone wants to claim that I have some sort of bias in this conversation, let me just say that some of my favorite films of all time are big budget blockbusters. Jurassic Park, 1999's The Mummy immediately come to mind. Beyond that, though, I've enjoyed a ton of spectacled action romps that have little to no substance. And there's nothing wrong with that because those movies are fun and it's okay to have fun at the movies. Regarding the MCU specifically, I've enjoyed all the ones that I've seen in a they're good but not great capacity, and I've been a Star Wars fan since I was quite young. Even so, this needs to be said. What Disney's been doing to the properties they now own is cancerous. Some people laugh a little bit when I use that term as an analogy, but I'm not joking, and I'm not using it for dramatic effect, I promise you. As much as some don't want to hear this, the analogy absolutely rings true. And if you don't think so, let's just examine for a moment what cancer actually is. It is a tumor of potentially unlimited growth. That is, if it, didn't ultimately destroy the host, that expands locally by invasion and systemically by metastasis. So let's fit a couple of pieces together here. Disney's approach to both Star Wars and the MCU has been to tie everything together canonically, do a bunch of spin-offs, and split the overall narrative between film and shows on their digital streaming platform. This business model is the tumor in the analogy. Other studios saw what Disney were doing and wanted to emulate their success, and thus adopted that business model for themselves. At this stage of the game now, shared universes that hop between television and film have become the norm industry-wide. The adoption of Disney's business model across the industry, that's the expansion of the aforementioned tumor. Well, Mike, cancer kills, and that's where your analogy is ultimately going to falter. We'll get to that momentarily. The most common response I get from people in my social circles are, well, I like this stuff, so it's no big deal. I love it, and I want all that's coming to me. And that's all well and good, because this was never strictly a conversation about the qualitative merit of these franchises, though quality at a certain point does play some part, as we will also discuss in just a moment. But spoiler alert, personal enjoyment doesn't mean that these practices aren't harmful to the industry as a whole. Both of those things can be true simultaneously. The next point that's frequently made is a bit more broad, such as, people clearly enjoy these properties, so who really cares at the end of the day? Everyone is entitled to enjoy whatever they want, but I have to answer that question with another question. Are people, and by that I mean the wider audience as a whole, really enjoying the constant barrage even from the properties that they love? There's a lot of evidence out there that indicates that no, they're not. People have been leaving Disney Plus in droves, quarter after quarter, for some time now. The studio has seen that decline in their revenue streams, and they're looking to pivot and correct course, at least to a certain degree. They've basically admitted openly that they've done too much, too fast, and that it's been harmful to their bottom line. The discourse online has changed a bit too. Fans and also some actual, in-print critics are more vocal than ever about losing interest because keeping up with the films and shows feels like a part-time job for them. Everything is so interconnected that missing a show or film leaves some undesirable gaps for the audience to fill, and that fear of missing out component is draining people. People have also complained about a decline in quality and how directionless everything feels, and it's starting to reflect in the MCU's ticket sales. Indeed, it is possible to have too much of a good thing. So, why? Why are things like this? It wasn't an accident, that's for sure. It was all by design. You see, Disney weren't just striving to make money, but to cultivate something that commands total mind share. They wanted you to be so invested in Marvel and Star Wars and the like that you wouldn't have time to watch output from their competitors. That's the idea behind this business model. Not that their competitors who wanted to emulate Disney's so-called success have fared much better. The DC Extended Universe, for example, and famously known, while having plenty of potential, lacked any sense of organic growth, so it floundered almost immediately. And now, instead of pivoting to something else entirely, Warner Brothers are just rebooting the whole thing immediately with James Gunn. Now, in some of the more reasonable discussions that I have with people tally up the points that I've already just made and they say, well, look, the market has always spoken in the past, right? So how is this any different? If people are tired of superheroes in joined universes or the like, won't these studios eventually follow the money and inevitably move on to something else? And that's an extremely fair and valid point to raise because Westerns, for example, were a massive hit a long, long time ago, and it dominated the industry for decades, much like the MCU has been doing since the early 2000s. Likewise, though, eventually people got their fill and the industry had to pivot and rely on other things. But I no longer think that letting the market speak anymore is an answer. It was perhaps 5, 10, 15 years ago, but now the landscape of cinema and filmed entertainment in general is drastically different. You see, the industry has been so busy cannibalizing themselves that I think we're dangerously close to a point of no return. That is, if we haven't crossed that threshold already. Let me provide a little context here. If we go back in time just a little bit, people were going to the movies to see a vast range of tone and complexity in the films that they saw. There was certainly fun and lighter fare, sure, but people weren't only interested in going to see one thing. People were game to take in a comedy, musical, drama, horror, or a suspense flick, and so on. But studios haven't given much visibility out there to anything other than the fantastical for at least 20 years now. When you see movie trailers on TV, think about it. 9 times out of 10, it's a special effects driven extravaganza that's getting the spotlight, right? So as a result, over the course of time, people have been conditioned to believe that the only reason that they should go and visit the cinema anymore is to see those big budget films. Which brings me back around to my these business models are cancerous point. Let's follow some bullet points, okay? The cinemas make most of their money from concessions. Their $8 bucket of popcorn, the $6 or $7 sodas, the $5 or $6 nachos, and so on. That means in order to stay afloat, they need butts and seats because butts and seats means more concession sales. The pandemic hit in 2020, and that kept movie houses and cineplexes closed for quite some time. Keep in mind that they still had to pay rent every month without so much as a dime of income being generated. And for a massive cineplex, the amount of space that they're renting out, it's not cheap at all. A lot of smaller movie houses had to close as a result, and the larger chains have been struggling ever since. With the fear of illness and the convenience of streaming, people have been more inclined than ever to just stay at home unless there was something truly jaw dropping, such as Avatar, that compelled them to go out. Theater chains have tried to entice filmgoers further by offering subscription plans, meaning you'll pay a flat fee each month to see as many movies as you'd like, but that hasn't panned out to any meaningful degree. In short, I'm going to stop counting on my hands here. In short, this means that cinemas are beholden to big blockbusters. It's arguable at this point if fun popcorn flicks alone are enough to sustain cinemas overall, but it's what they have, so it's now the best chance that the film going experience has for survival in 2024 and beyond. There's also the ever worsening economy to take into consideration at this point. And last, but certainly not least, the big blockbusters are seeing a decline in ticket sales. So here's the situation in real brief. Movie theaters and cineplexes need the bigger films to bring people in. The film industry has disincentivized people from going to the movies with their digital streaming services. They've also disincentivized people from buying physical media. They've also released content well beyond the point of oversaturation, and people are finally beginning to feel burnt out by it. As a result, ticket sales of major tentpole films are beginning to suffer. So, with all that in mind, what is the only real outcome if this trend continues? Cinemas will die. That's just the cold, hard truth. They can't survive on nostalgia and well wishes alone. And it's all because the industry just couldn't help themselves. They couldn't pace themselves. They both invented and adopted truly cancerous business models that they should have known were going to burn bright but fade just as fast. That is why I've never been a fan of what Disney and the rest of the industry, by extension, have been doing these last few years or so. It was foreseeable. The death rattle was so pronounced, practically everyone should have heard it, bean counters and film goers alike. And are the studios, by the way, responding by finally listening to the backlash and weakened box office numbers and pivoting? No, instead, they're doubling down. Disney has a full slate of MCU and Star Wars to come, and I think their opportunity to try and change from offering too much content in too many different places. Mandalorian Season 4 is going to be a theatrical release instead of a Disney Plus thing now. And again, Warner Brothers, instead of moving on, they're still going to throw most of their eggs into the same old superhero basket, which means that all of these companies are completely failing to take into account the fact that their collective audience is tired of it. So, what if the post-Deadpool 3 MCU or James Gunn's DC universe failed to reinvigorate people's love for these franchises and cinema overall? Well, it doesn't look too promising, to say the least. So, yeah, my analogy is on point. It looks like the cancer is doing what it's known to do, and that's to kill the host. The film-going experience has a very real risk of dying, ladies and gentlemen. Let me qualify that a bit further. I can see a future where the major theater chains succumb, have to close, but perhaps smaller operations will be constructed with, smaller, like less screens. Like I have a local Cineplex near me that has 18 screens, right? Maybe you'll see something that has like 4 or 5 or 6 screens. That sort of a business model prevail at some point. Who knows? But it's a bummer, Perhaps those smaller operations will be constructed, become the norm, and they'll just be servicing the leftover niche that still enjoys the film going experience as opposed to staying at home. And what is that going to do for the quality of film in the future? If everything is destined to end up on a streaming platform or get treated like a redheaded stepchild, in smaller cineplexes, filmmakers growing up, they always envision from a very young age that they're going to have a feature film playing on the big screen someday. And now it looks like that dream is potentially about to be robbed from future generations, and it never should have came to this. It never should have. Studios need to hit a significant reset button, and they need to do it now. But it doesn't seem likely. I hope I'm wrong about the direction things are likely to head in, but so far, everything that I've been talking about in this video, I've been warning people about for years. For years. And it's all been laughs and giggles, and it's great that people are getting their fill of content, but it's coming at a price, and the price could very well be that you stop getting more of the things that you enjoy, because if it doesn't resonate, eventually it will go away, and it doesn't have to be that way. If the studios just allowed themselves a little bit of a wait and allowed people to miss things once again and release a movie every couple of years and just keep that going, sort of like James Bond, right? God, the James Bond franchise has like over 30 films, but it's been doing it since like what, the 60s? I'm really concerned. I hope I'm wrong again, but slow down and allow these things to live for a very long time instead of killing them off in just, a couple of swift decades. Anyway, that's all I really have to say about this subject for now. And I think this is probably the definitive conversation that we're going to have about it here on this channel until something extraordinary happens, like, a big movie theater chain like AMC or Regal, announces that they're shutting down indefinitely. We'll talk about it for sure in this format at some point if it comes to that. But until then, I don't know. Very, very, very concerned.